I think we've already done a video about how students got kicked out on the first day. How do you get kicked out of anything on the first day? What kind of circumstances have to happen, and what kind of attitude do you have to get you just totally into an Uno reverse real life situation? Like, here's your job now, no it isn't. Well, we're going to talk about that in these stories, so here we go. Students, how did your teacher get fired on the first day of school? Story 1. Not the first day of school, but I had a teacher who was canned halfway into the year. Our former Spanish teacher left the school to get a job working at a college because he needed the money to raise his nephew, who he adopted. Sad story, not going to go into much detail. When we arrived at school the next year, there was a new Spanish teacher, a young lady who was fresh out of college. She seemed nice and fun, which are two things everyone wants to see in a new teacher, and many of us were optimistic for a good year under her teaching. Soon, though, many of us began to realize that something major was off. First, she was always late by at least 10 minutes. We discovered that she was working a second job in town at the Wendy's. No problem there. I know several teachers who have needed to do 2 jobs to make ends meet. But she couldn't balance the two, and constantly was late turning papers back to us as she didn't feel like grading after her second job. Because she was late as well, she had to rush her lesson in a much smaller time frame. Second, she had mental disorders. It wasn't one of those things where we had to wonder if she did, because she publicly bragged about having them. Over the course of the few months she was our teacher, we found out she had bipolar depression. Her roommate was into cutting, and she surrounded herself at her house with dark imagery, including a copy of the famous picture Saturn devouring his son. And this is what she made public. Third, many of her assignments would encourage us to say, in Spanish of course, such things as, "What teacher do you not like?" or "What student do you have a problem with?" and wouldn't accept none for an answer. Fourth, many of her lessons weren't really lessons. She put on movies with the Spanish language on and played them. I don't think we ever got through one movie either, because it always seemed to change from time to time. Finally, the big thing that we discovered was that she had lied. She didn't even speak Spanish and had lied to get the position. She had faked her credentials and did just enough to get the job. Seeing that the school was desperate for a Spanish teacher after the last one left, the class president, one of the other teacher's daughters, and her friend had their suspicions about her and made several purposeful mistakes on tests that would have been obvious to someone who has more than surface knowledge in Spanish. When several assignments and tests were marked correctly, they approached their mom, who gave them an audience with the principal. Halfway into the year, she was late again, but this time she was the latest she ever was. You can probably guess what happened next. This is reminding me of Jack Black in the School of Rock, except it's all incompetence and no rising together as a class after that. With such a need for teachers these days, it's kind of sad that someone was able to skate her way into a position by just faking it. And why as a teacher? If you're going to skate your way into a job, maybe try one that pays a little more. Maybe teachers have a really awesome healthcare program that she needed. Story 2. Not the first day of school. Not even a teacher. A freaking police officer. I'm pretty sure someone might have heard of this or recognized this, but if you know, you know. When I was in middle school, we had a few police officers who would protect the school, I guess. I mean, what else would we need them for? There was one who we'll call Francis. Yes, his real name, because I have zero sympathy for child perverts. So curse him. Who I used to think was a really cool and chill guy. He was very nice and kind to pretty much everyone, even the students. That is, until several years later. My grandmother got a newspaper on her driveway like everyone in town does, and she read it. My mother was there too. They were downstairs talking about what I didn't know at that moment. I went down there, and my mother told me that one of the officers from the middle school I used to go to was fired and arrested for texting underage boys that went to the school. Apparently, he was gay, judging by the fact that he took interest in boys. but we're talking about minors here. People who aren't even adults yet. These kids were at least 10 to 12 years old, according to the paper. The worst part was that he's been doing this for a while. I'm not sure how this stuff was discovered, but I had all sorts of chills sliding down my spine. It was disturbing. I literally thank God every day I wasn't one of those kids. His wife left him after she heard about it. I'm not sure if he has kids, but if he does, I feel bad for them. The fact that this stuff has apparently been going on since I was in middle school makes me wonder what else he was doing with all that time in his freaking office. It's really unbelievable that he's been doing that stuff for that long and no one knew about it. I don't blame anyone for not knowing, but it's just really bone-chilling to find out years later that one of the nicest people I've ever met was a complete, total child pervert. It makes me sad, too, as he's one of the adults I looked up to when I was having trouble behaving in middle school. Well, it seems we have another one that is not the first day, and this one isn't even a teacher. That part's a little disappointing. It's also a bit unnerving that this person was such an inspiration to a lot of people, and it turned out that he was texting these boys. Did anything happen beyond that? I hope not. What happened to this guy after? I mean, he didn't just disappear. Story 3. So she wasn't fired on the first day, but we knew she wasn't long for the job on day 1. Freshman year of high school, geography class. We have a brand new teacher, and she asks us, as a fun little opener, to draw a map of the classroom, and then proceeds to hand us all boxes of crayons and construction paper like we're 5. But a new teacher, small town, none of us say anything because our parents will hear about it, so we all sit down and color. As we're making our maps, there's a bit of chatter, nothing too crazy. Just the first day of school banter since the class and teachers seem like they're going to be fairly chill. Then suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere, the teacher screams at us, "None of you have any idea how hard it is to be a teacher!" And she storms out of the classroom. We're all looking around completely baffled. I was fairly new to town myself at the time, so I hadn't been talking to anyone. But I had been listening to the various conversations, and I hadn't heard anything that should have set her off. And trust me, I'm a massive teacher's pet. The most we did was give each other looks when she started treating us like 5-year-olds. But no one called it out. Lady was just dealing with life, I guess, but like I said, a small town. Everyone knew before the day was over that she'd just screamed at her class while they were coloring with crayons on her orders. She was not hired back the next year. Kinda sad for her, since she's also the teacher who got me treatment when I broke my arm in the gym, and the gym teacher wouldn't let me go to the nurse. So this teacher lasted a whole year? What was the rest of the class like? Did she make them put on a geography play with songs and costumes? She seems to have some good qualities. She was able to get a treatment for a broken arm for that student that was being refused one. Did she teach kindergarten before? Story 4. There was one day I overslept and showed up to a 2-hour class 15 minutes late. I caught some of my students on the way out, collapsed in my chair panting, and begun the algebra lecture. As far as I know, no one ever squealed on me. That was years ago. Since then, I have walked into class no later than 5 minutes. That time was when I ran out of the classroom because I left the special papers for my vision-impaired student in my car and realized 5 minutes before class when he walked in. Another time I walked into class and collapsed and explained that I had just sprained my ankle getting to my car and thus would not be walking around the desks for the next month. But the massive bleeding from my knee was wrapped in gauze, so when I had time to get an ace bandage and a mess of ointments and such after class, I'd be well on my way to not gritting my teeth in pain. I think that class was impressed or appalled by my dedication. Then there was the time I was asked if I wanted to take an additional class that semester, said yes, and within the hour got spammed by students wondering what was going on. Professor vanished from the face of the earth, never showed up, but when they reassigned it to me, the email professor button redirected to me. So I had to explain that I was not, in fact, Professor Vanished, nor did I have any idea what happened to Professor Vanished. nor indeed did I know who Professor Vanished even was. But his vanishing was most certainly not my fault, and stop complaining to me about it. Story 5. We had a teaching student when I was in 2nd grade. She was with us for, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, and then there were some other people coming in and watching how she performs during class. After that, she came to us in class and got angry at us because she failed her test. And she says stuff like we're little brats that don't listen to their teachers and stuff like that. Remember, it was 2nd grade, so we were about 7 years old, and then there's this adult in front of us getting really angry at us because we apparently make her fail her test. We all looked at each other really shocked because we didn't know what we did wrong. We were a good class. I would say 90% of the time we did as teachers told us. Our main teacher was with us in the room, and she stepped in and stopped her from talking. Next day, our teacher came to us and told us it wasn't our fault for this student teacher failing the test, and that she was just angry and she blamed it on the next best target. She also said that the student teacher would never come back to our school for her behavior. But I don't know if she continued the path to be a teacher or if she stopped after failing the test. Story 6. The geography teacher thing reminded me of our own from high school. Our original geography teacher was this sort of goofy lady who could handle our uppity class well. Well, it was more like 3 or 4 guys, actually, but the effect spreads. One day, she goes on sick leave or something, and we're getting a new one. First, the troublemakers think it's going to be some young schmuck they can bully easily. But then word comes around from other classes that the new teacher is an ironic witch, and people start getting spooked. New teacher comes in. Everyone immediately quiets down. Her appearance can only be described as a fat goth gypsy fortune teller mixed with No-Face from Spirited Away. Dressed in all black, had this really long jet black hair that was slightly poofy so it would cover her shoulders and make her look completely oval, and a vicious face to boot. Very stiff, gives a vibe of military discipline. I've never seen my class shrink down to poppy seed so fast. After a few classes, it turns out she's pretty laid back and cool. Just was extremely sinister looking. Had a noticeable Bosnian accent, too. One time, one of the troublemakers jokingly commented that getting an A in her examinations was easy, as all you had to do was make a Trebinje as a country joke. Do you think maybe she started the rumors herself? That way, when she got to the class, she didn't have to deal with very many outbursts? I think that kind of word-of-mouth campaign would have worked great for this kind of situation if it were done on purpose. She seems like a nice enough teacher. Maybe she just found a way to exert control right from the start. Story 7. The weirdest case I had was a foreign language teacher who got fired after a month. You know, this guy seemed like a pretty special type of one. For us first graders of middle school, he was pretty cool. His English, foreign language to where I live, wasn't really as good, but sure he worked well for ethics class. But that wasn't the reason he got fired. Apparently, he had a behavior with the high schoolers who made them uncomfortable. He tried to explore topics on intimacy, and some of the students didn't like it, even accusing him of being gender-biased and a child pervert. The real thing was, these seemed to be false accusations, and some of the girl students were terribly biased. However, it seems that he had a different behavior with the middle schoolers than high schoolers. I wasn't there to know the full story, but the accusations didn't come very well. This teacher acted cool and normal to us, but after these accusations, everyone twisted his words. It's still kind of a mystery to me. That teacher inspired me in some ways, and didn't feel anything wrong with his mental state.
Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 8. Mine wasn't really the first day, but a teacher was fired either way. So back in middle school, I got a new math teacher who, well, looking into his eyes, seemed to have no soul. It was creepy. He obviously didn't know what he was doing when later that year he taught the math subject wrong and no one could get the right answer. Another year of school passes and I'm beginning high school. Taking my health class, I found out that a teacher was arrested at the middle school I just left. While they couldn't state names, they talked about the new math teacher in description that anyone who had his class knew without a doubt that it was this teacher. Reading more into it, he accidentally texted an undercover cop who was trying to act like a minor for some inappropriate pictures. Didn't realize I could tell someone who has no soul from the look of their eyes. Story 9. It really depends on whether the school district you're at doesn't have a surplus of teachers or have a teacher union. A teacher could keep their job due to the fact they're literally irreplaceable. I should know because my mom was on the PTA. On that note, my Spanish teacher in freshman year of high school should have been fired because, 1, she told the class day 1 about the domestic violence case she has pending against her soon-to-be ex-husband, including the details of what happened. It's not that violent. Basically, she wanted to walk out and her husband hid the keys so she couldn't leave with their baby. 2, for some damn reason, her kid keeps getting sick easily, so she always leaves school early during or before her last period class, which sadly I had, to go pick up her kid. Majority of the second half of the semesters were just worksheets and Spanish movies. Are you sure this isn't the same as the other person who had the job at Wendy's? What is it with Spanish teachers? And also, when are we going to get a story where someone gets fired on the first day? It seems like every story so far has started out with, well, not on their first day, but... Come on, we want first day drama. Story 10. In my country, the universities that are known as the best are usually the public ones. We have many great teachers, but there are a few that are very difficult to deal with. A friend of mine had a teacher that suddenly stopped going to classes. Since some teachers are sometimes absent, the students took about 2 weeks, she had 2 classes per week, to realize she wasn't coming back. Apparently, she decided to travel abroad to study as an interchange student, and just didn't tell anyone in the university about it. I doubt she was fired, though, since she was from a public university, so as a public servant, the law makes it almost impossible to fire them. The university just found someone else to take her place that year. I also had a teacher who, as he got to class one day, heard some students talking of politics. He got mad, went away, and never came back. He was fired, though, because he wasn't a public servant. Story 11. I was in Ireland studying advanced English, and they announced we'd have a new teacher coming all the way from New Zealand. The guy arrives, introduces himself, tells us he's taught English for years, even in prison, and that he was excited to be there. Then the next day, he doesn't show up. After a while, we go to the office to tell the staff, and they try to call him to no avail. We were really worried, of course, but it later turns out that he fired himself after months of preparation to come to Ireland, after a 48 hours trip, after just a day of work in which he seemed so eager, he just noped the hell out, just like that. Not only that, he fired himself on a Tuesday, and Wednesday he came back to the office asking if he could have the job back. The staff said no. I heard he just said namaste and left. At last we have a one-day teacher. Kind of weird that he quit, but I'll take it. It almost couldn't have been a story like this if they actually did take him back. Story 12. I'm glad I'm no longer in public school because it was awful for 12 years, elementary to high school. In the 2nd grade, there was a substitute teacher who obviously didn't know how to handle 6 to 7-year-olds. He demanded that everyone be silent and not ask questions while a guest visitor featured a presentation on marine wildlife. The visitor was open to questions, but the substitute had the ones who raised their hands to ask questions be sent to the quiet corner. When our normal teacher returned the next day, the kids, including myself, told her how awful the substitute treated us, and she passed this info to the principal. From the grapevine, the guest visitor told the principal about the sub's behavior and that he punished us for just wanting to ask questions. The sub was obviously not welcome to our school anymore. Story 13. Technically, first day / couple of weeks of school. In middle school, for the new school year, I had first period in the multi-purpose room. I forgot what the class was even supposed to be for, but there was only like a dozen of us. Our teacher shows up for the first day, and we just kind of do nothing on day one. The next day, the teacher doesn't show up, so we just hang out in the multi-purpose room until the period is over. This goes on for 1 to 2 weeks, where our teacher just never came to class, and we just hung out unsupervised. Eventually, the school admin found out and sent someone to watch us for a couple of weeks while they found a long-term substitute. I guess that teacher had just decided to quit on day one without notice. Story 14. Funny story. Now, I was not in this teacher's class, but I think this was in the middle of the school year. Some teacher left, so there was a replacement. Now, this teacher had the exact same name as a student who left the school. So on his first day, he gets a threatening email from a student telling him that he can get him fired. Now, this makes him nervous and is like, oh no, am I going to be fired on my first day? So he goes to the principal and asks him about it, and the principal says, oh, you're fine. This was an old email. The kid emailed the teacher thinking he was the old student because they had the same name. He did not get fired and is one of the best teachers I know. Story 15. When I was in 5th grade, one day our class was supposed to walk over to the nursing home a block away for the school to do some project with the residents. I forgot how it happened, but I got left at the school, and the teacher had to walk back to get me. She wasn't fired, but it did lead to me getting a funny nickname. She liked to give all her students nicknames. Up until that point, my nickname had been Meatloaf. For health class, we had to ask our parents about the day we were born and write about what they told us. In my paper, I wrote that my parents said I was beautiful, but I probably looked like a 6-pound meatloaf. After that incident, my nickname was Leftover Meatloaf. Story 16. My math teacher was pretty cool. His one pet peeve was students never learned how exponents or roots worked because he was the geometry teacher, and the class the literal year before was the introduction to those concepts, which were then used throughout the course of the year. He kept telling the admin that he wanted to become the Algebra 1 teacher so he could teach those concepts, and the school never let him. He went to a neighboring school the year immediately after mine because they were going to let him be an Algebra 1 teacher to teach exponents and roots. Ran into him a few years later while I worked as a janitor, and he's satisfied with his current position. Story 17. My English teacher was one of my favorite teachers ever. From the way that he taught and to the jokes that also made the class flow, everyone loved him. But my class wasn't one of the most organized. At the end of the semester, we thought he was done with his class and started talking, standing up and doing typical stuff. My classmate wondered that the teacher was trying to set up something, but to no avail. Few seconds later, everyone groups up. He turns grumpy, just rants at us, and leaves the entire school. I got home in tears, thinking it was my fault. I still maintain contact with him on Instagram. Story 18. I was the kid that got forgotten on a school trip once. We went for a test screening of a movie, and afterwards we got a question sheet to fill out. I really like movies and wanted to give some proper feedback, so I took a bit longer than the other kids. So when I was out of the cinema, they had all went back to the school without me, 5-minute walk. But I just went home, as it was almost end of school time anyways, and I was old enough to travel by myself. Never did say anything about it to anyone at my school, but looking back at it, I probably should have. Story 19. Not the first day of school, but after spring break, my French teacher was gone for a whole week. And then when she finally came back, she stood up in front of the class, started crying, and then walked out, and we never saw her again. Pretty sad, actually. I heard that her fiancé had broken off their engagement, and she must have been having some kind of breakdown. But last I heard, she was living in France and was thriving. And I hope that's true because she was a really nice lady. Story 20. Weird that the teacher got fired for forgetting a student at the museum. Once, 2 teachers forgot me and a friend on a train during a school excursion. We had to call our parents to find out how to get back since we were stranded somewhere we never were. Nothing happened to the teachers. Absolutely nothing. But we got blamed that we didn't pay attention. And yes, we were underage. We were like 12.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.